All right, ready to dive into some serious material. We're tackling C.S. Lewis today, specifically his classic work, Mere Christianity.
Hmm.
And, it's not every day you get to unpack a book born out of wartime radio broadcasts.
Right. Talk
Yeah,
about speaking to the moment.
exactly.
This was World War II, the Blitz. Society was kind of freaking out, searching for solid ground amidst the chaos.
Makes you wonder what Lewis would make of our world today.
Seriously?
But okay, so Mere Christianity, the goal here is to get at the heart of the Christian faith, right? The meaning essential, not simplistic.
Yeah, Lewis wasn't about watering things down. He was a layman, not a theologian, which actually made his words even more powerful for people at the time.
Makes sense. No ivory tower pronouncements, just straight talk. And we can't forget, Lewis himself journeyed from atheism to Christianity. So he knew both sides of the coin.
Oh, absolutely. He wasn't afraid to wrestle with the tough questions, the doubts. In fact, he saw them as essential to genuine faith.
Which brings us to one of his most famous concepts,
Yeah.
the law of human nature. That innate sense of right and wrong we all seem to share. Like, if you saw someone cut a line, wouldn't something in you scream, foul?
It's like this universal code, isn't it? Regardless of your background or beliefs, some things just feel inherently wrong.
And Lewis uses this to build his case for something bigger than ourselves, for God.
Exactly. He argues that this moral compass, it can't be explained away by mere social conditioning or cultural norms.
Okay, so we're hardwired for morality, you're saying. But what does that tell us about the nature of God?
Well, this is where it gets really interesting. Because Lewis was adamant that God isn't just some distant, impersonal force. He completely rejected pantheism, the idea that God is everything and everything is God.
Right, I remember that part. So what's the alternative?
For Lewis, it's this personal, involved God. A God who created the universe but is also incredibly grieved by the suffering within it.
That's such a different image than the one a lot of people have in their minds. This isn't a God who's aloof or indifferent to our pain.
Not at all. And this is crucial because it gets to the heart of that age-old question. If God is all-powerful and all-loving, why is there so much evil and suffering in the world?
Right, the classic dilemma. It seems like Lewis tackles this head on.
He does. And he uses this phrase that always sticks with me. Don't talk damned nonsense.
Don't talk. Okay, I need some context here.
Yeah. It's classic Lewis. He's basically saying, this isn't some far-off deity unconcerned with our struggles. This is a God who is in the trenches with us.
Wow, that's powerful.
It is. It's raw. It's honest. And it goes against this idea of Christianity as some passive acceptance of fate.
So we're not just supposed to sit back and let life happen.
No way.
Where does this idea of actively fighting fit into the picture?
That's what we're going to unravel next. So we've got this God who's not just watching from the sidelines, right? He's invested. He's fighting for us with us.
Yeah, and that makes me think, okay, what does that mean for us? How are we supposed to be in this fight?
Exactly. And that's where things get really practical. Lewis dives into what he calls Christian behavior, and it's all about these virtues, these core qualities.
Like what? Give me some examples.
Well, you've got your classic virtues, prudence, justice, fortitude. But then there's temperance, which always throws people for a loop.
How so? I feel like temperance gets a bad rap these days.
Totally. People hear temperance and they think, oh, no fun allowed.
Right, like some strict, joyless existence.
Exactly. But Lewis flips the script on that whole idea. For him, temperance isn't about deprivation. It's about going the right length with pleasures.
Interesting. So not total abstinence, but not going overboard either.
Exactly. It's about finding that balance, that sweet spot.
So no more all-you-can-eat buffets.
Maybe not all you can eat. But the point is, even good things taken to an extreme can become harmful.
Makes sense. Like you can be so gung-ho about your hobby, you end up neglecting everything else in your life.
Right. Or that friend who's so obsessed with fitness. They forget how to just relax and enjoy a good meal.
It's like they've become teetotalers about everything but their one passion.
Exactly. And that's not balance. It's just another form of imbalance.
So temperance is about enjoying life, but with a sense of moderation.
Exactly. And this idea extends beyond personal habits. It bleeds into Lewis's views on social morality, on what a truly Christian society would look like.
Okay, now we're getting into interesting territory.
Right. He talks about this idea of there being no room for passengers or parasites.
Whoa, okay, strong words. What does he mean by that?
Well, he's challenging this notion of just coasting through life, of not contributing, not pulling your weight.
So it's about everyone having a role to play, using their gifts and talents.
Exactly. And this ties into his views on charity, on giving.
Oh, yeah. Lewis had some pretty radical things to say about that, didn't he?
He did. He wasn't about just tossing a few coins in a hat. He believed in giving until it hurt, sacrificing our own comfort for the sake of others.
That's a tall order. But it really gets at the heart of what it means to love your neighbor, doesn't it?
It does, and it leads us to what is perhaps the most challenging aspect of Lewis's whole argument. This idea that we, as flawed human beings, can never be good enough on our own.
This is where the shocking alternative comes in, right?
Exactly. Lewis doesn't shy away from the hard questions, like if God is perfect and we're not, how do we bridge that gap?
Right, it's like this impossible chasm.
Exactly. And he lays out the options pretty bluntly. Either Jesus was who he claimed to be, the Son of God, sent to bridge that gap.
Or he was delusional, or worse.
Right. There's no middle ground, no safe compromise.
I can see why that would be a tough pill to swallow for some people.
It is. But then Lewis, being the brilliant teacher he was, offers this analogy. He compares understanding Christ's sacrifice to understanding how our bodies digest food.
Okay, I'm intrigued, but also a little confused. How do those two things connect? Okay, I think I'm following you, but help me connect the dots here. How does food digestion relate to, the whole concept of salvation and a relationship with God?
Sure. Think of it this way. When you eat, your body breaks down the food, extracts nutrients, and turns it into energy, right? You don't have to be a biologist to appreciate a good meal.
That's true. I rarely even think about the science behind it. But the results, those I can appreciate.
Exactly. And for Lewis, it's kind of similar with faith. We can trust and benefit from Christ's sacrifice, even if we don't fully get all the theological nitty-gritty of it all.
So, you don't need to be a theologian with a bunch of degrees to experience this transformation you're talking about.
Right. You don't have to have all the answers figured out beforehand. And speaking of transformation, I love how Lewis uses the term good infection to describe it.
Good infection. That's an interesting way to put it.
Yeah.
What's he getting at there?
So it's like this. It's not just about adopting new beliefs, right? It's about this profound change in our very being, becoming little Christs, as Lewis calls it, living reflections of him in the world.
Little Christs? Man, Lewis really had a way with words. And it reminds me of something we touched on earlier about there being no ordinary people. Is that kind of what he's getting at here? That through this good infection, we can, do extraordinary things.
Exactly. You hit the nail on the head. And what's key here is that it's not about mustering up some superhuman willpower or anything.
Okay, so it's not about checking a list of good deeds or striving for this unattainable perfection.
No, not at all. It's about recognizing what Lewis calls our bankruptcy.
Bankruptcy. Now, there's another word you don't hear every day in a spiritual context.
It might sound strange, but it's actually very powerful. It's about recognizing that we're incapable of being truly good on our own. We need help and accepting God's grace.
So it's about surrendering this idea that we can somehow earn our way into a right relationship with God, that we can somehow be good enough.
Right on. It's in that humility, that admission of our need for something greater than ourselves, that real change can happen. And, that takes faith.
I was just about to ask you about that. Where does faith come in with all of this?
Well, for Lewis, there were two levels to faith. There's the intellectual part, the accepting of the doctrines. But then there's this deeper level that comes from recognizing our own limitations.
So it's one thing to say, yeah, I believe that, but quite another to actually live it, to experience the truth of it in your own life.
Exactly. It's like that saying, you don't truly understand something until you've lived it. It's when we try to be perfectly good on our own and we inevitably fail, that this deeper level of faith can emerge.
It's like you could read every book under the sun about riding a bike, but until you actually get on and try and maybe fall a few times, you don't really get it.
Such a great analogy. And that's where this beautiful concept of hope comes into play. And I don't mean hope in the sense of wishful thinking, but as this essential aspect of the Christian life.
Okay, now you've piqued my interest. Break it down for me. What does genuine hope look like in this context?
Lewis uses this amazing analogy. He talks about aiming for heaven and getting earth thrown in. It's about having that eternal perspective, seeing that our ultimate purpose extends beyond this life. And that perspective, it influences everything, how we see the world, how we interact with others, how we approach our everyday lives.
So it's not about escaping the world, but about living it differently, almost like with one eye on the bigger picture.
You got it. It's about living with intentionality, purpose. And that brings us to one of the most mind-blowing parts of Lewis's argument. the Trinity.
Oh boy, the Trinity. That's a whole other conversation. I'm not sure we have time to unpack all that here.
You're right, it's a huge topic. But never fear, Lewis manages to make it surprisingly accessible. He uses this analogy of dimensions, which always helps me wrap my head around it.
Dimensions like length, width, and height. Go on.
Exactly. We experience the world in 3 dimensions, right? But imagine a being that could only perceive 2 dimensions. They could never fully grasp something like a cube, right?
Right. They'd only see a flat shape, not the whole picture. Their minds would be blown if they could suddenly see in 3D.
Precisely. And Lewis is suggesting that the Trinity, the 3-in-1 nature of God, that's a concept that's beyond our current understanding. We're like those 2-dimensional beings trying to understand a 3-dimensional reality.
So we can't fully wrap our finite minds around this infinite God. That's both humbling and a little intimidating.
It really is. But the amazing thing is, even if we can't fully comprehend it, we can still have a relationship with this God who is beyond our comprehension. And that brings us to Lewis's final and perhaps most challenging idea. He says that Christ coming to Earth wasn't just another stage in human evolution, but the start of a whole new kind of evolution, a spiritual one.
It's not about getting smarter or stronger or even morally better. It's about something much deeper, something that changes us at our core.
Yes, it's about becoming a new creation. And that's what Lewis leaves us with, this idea that maybe, just maybe, this transformation is happening all around us.
Wow. It really makes you think about what it means to be human, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
You know, from the law of human nature to the challenge of Christ's claims, from the virtues to becoming little Christs ourselves through this good infection. Lewis really covered a lot of ground. It's a lot to digest, for sure. But if there's one thing we hope you take away from this deep dive, it's that it's okay to ask the big questions, to wrestle with the doubts. Because it's often in those moments of searching that we stumble upon the most profound truths. So keep exploring, keep seeking, and who knows what you might find.